The power dynamics of love. You send a text, it says, "Hey, I miss you, want to come over tonight?" Then you wait 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20. You check your phone again, no reply. You put it down, you pick it back up. You read your own message again, wondering if it sounded needy. You start to second guess the word miss. You think about sending a follow-up, something light, something that takes the weight off. Maybe a meme, maybe a no worries if not. But you don't send anything because you know that would make it worse. 2 texts with no reply in between is a kind of confession. 40 minutes later, they reply, "Maybe, I'll let you know." And just like that, everything shifts. You were the one who reached out. You were the one who said what you felt. And now you are the one waiting for a decision that someone else gets to make. Your evening is on hold. Theirs is not. You are watching your phone. They are doing something else. This is not about who loves whom more. This is about who needs the next moment more. And in that gap between your message and their answer, a quiet structure takes shape. One person is leaning forward. The other is leaning back. One person's evening depends on a reply. The other person's evening is already full. That gap is where power lives in love. Not the kind of power people use on purpose. Not the kind anyone plans, but the kind that forms naturally whenever 2 people don't need each other in exactly the same way, at exactly the same time. Most people have felt this, the waiting, the checking, the careful wording, but most people don't have a name for what they are feeling. They call it anxiety, they call it insecurity, they call it being too much. But it's none of those things. It is a reaction to a real structure, one that exists in the space between 2 people who are not standing on equal ground. This is how it works. What power means in love. When most people hear the word power next to the word love, they think of something ugly. Control, manipulation, games, someone being cruel on purpose, someone pulling strings. But that is not the kind of power we are talking about here. The kind of power that runs through love is quieter than that. It doesn't yell. It doesn't threaten. Most of the time, it doesn't even know it's there. It just exists in the background, shaping how 2 people talk, wait, decide, and feel, without either of them ever pointing at it and saying, "This is what's happening." Power in love is simply this: who can afford to wait and who cannot. That's it. That is the whole engine. If one person needs an answer and the other person can take their time giving it, there is an imbalance. If one person is afraid of losing the relationship and the other person isn't as afraid, there is an imbalance. If one person needs the other for comfort, stability, housing, money, identity, or daily emotional grounding, and the other person has those things on their own, there is an imbalance. This doesn't mean the relationship is bad. It doesn't mean anyone is doing anything wrong. It just means the 2 people are standing on different ground. And when you stand on different ground, you move differently. The person with less at stake moves slowly. They take their time. They are calm. They respond when they feel like it. They don't overthink their words before speaking. They don't rehearse their texts. They don't lie awake running through what they said at dinner. The person with more at stake moves carefully. They watch. They read into things. They notice tone shifts. They adjust their words. They hold back things they want to say because they are worried about how it will land. They replay conversations, they prepare, they manage, Both people are behaving normally. Both are reacting to the situation they are in, but their situations are not the same. And that difference, even if it is small, changes everything about how they talk to each other, how they fight, how they apologize, and how they love. How the imbalance forms. It usually starts with something small. So small that neither person notices it happening. One person says, "I love you" first. The other person says it back, but a beat late. And in that beat, something shifts. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone would notice if they weren't paying attention. But the person who said it first now knows they put something on the table that wasn't matched at the same speed. They notice. They file it away. They don't mention it, but it sits there. Or it starts with need. One person just moved to a new city. They don't have friends nearby, they don't have family close. Their partner becomes their whole social world. Not on purpose, it just happens. One person has somewhere to go on a Friday night without the other. The other person doesn't. Now, one person depends on the other for company, for plans, for connection, and the other person has a full life outside the relationship. The partner didn't ask for that kind of weight, but they carry it now, whether they know it or not. Or it starts with money. One person makes more. Or one person owns the apartment. Or one person has savings and the other has debt. Nobody talks about it directly, but it sits underneath every decision. Who chooses the restaurant? Who suggests the vacation? Who pays for the groceries? Who brings up the idea of cutting back? The person with more financial security doesn't feel the weight of those choices. The person with less feels it constantly. They feel it when they order the cheaper thing on the menu. They feel it when they don't suggest a trip they'd love to take. They feel it when their partner buys something nice without thinking about it, and they know they can't do the same. Or it starts with desire. One person wants the other more. Physically, emotionally. They reach out more. They initiate more. They are the one who crosses the room. They are the one who pulls the other close. And the other person receives that attention without having to earn it. Over time, the person who wants more starts to feel like they are always the one making the first move. And the person who is wanted starts to set the pace because they can. Or it starts with options. One person gets attention from other people. At work, at social events, online, they know on some level that other people find them attractive. They don't act on it. But the knowledge is there. It sits in the background like a cushion. If this relationship ends, they'll be fine. They'll have options. The other person doesn't have that cushion. They know it. They don't talk about it. But they feel it every time their partner gets a compliment from someone else. Every time someone flirts with their partner at a party. Every time their partner seems untroubled by the idea of being alone. None of these are dramatic moments. None of them involve arguments or ultimatums. They are just small differences in need, access, dependency, and alternatives. But they accumulate. And once they accumulate, they start to shape the way both people communicate, in ways that are almost invisible but deeply felt. How it changes the way people talk. Here is where it gets real. When there is an imbalance in a relationship, even a small one, it changes how both people use words. Not because they are trying to be strategic, not because anyone is playing a game, but because the stakes of every conversation are different depending on where you stand. The person with less power starts choosing words more carefully. They don't say, I need to talk about something that's been bothering me. They say, hey, can I ask you something? It's not a big deal. They soften. They shrink the ask. They minimize the thing before they even say it. They make it easy for the other person to say no without feeling guilty. They do this because they know, on some level in their body, if not in their mind, that pushing too hard could create distance. And distance is what they are most afraid of. The person with more power doesn't soften as much. They don't have to. They say what they think. They speak directly. They bring things up when they feel like it, not when the timing is perfect. They don't spend 20 minutes rehearsing a sentence before saying it. They don't test the temperature of the room before opening their mouth. This isn't cruelty, it's comfort. When you are not afraid of losing something, you don't guard your words. You just talk. But the difference is visible. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Watch how two people in a relationship handle a disagreement. One person brings up the issue. The other person gets quiet. Not angry quiet, just still. The first person keeps talking, trying to explain, trying to make it clearer, adding context, softening the edges. The quiet person gives short answers. I don't know. Maybe. I guess. The first person starts to feel like they are bothering the other, like they are being too much. So they back off. They say, never mind, it's fine. And the conversation is over. Not because the issue was resolved, but because one person couldn't bear the weight of the other person's silence. That exchange looks like a conversation, but it was shaped by power. The person who brought up the issue was taking a risk. They were betting that the discomfort of raising the topic was worth the chance of fixing it. The person who went quiet was not risking anything. Their silence cost them nothing. But the other person's silence, the never mind, it's fine, cost them the truth. Now watch how that same couple sends texts. One person writes longer messages. They explain themselves. They add context. They use phrases like, I just want to make sure we're good, and I hope that didn't come out wrong. The other person writes back in a few words. Yeah, we're fine. LOL, okay. Sounds good. The long messages are not a personality trait. They are a response to uncertainty. When you are not sure where you stand, you explain more. You fill the silence with words because silence feels dangerous. You over-communicate because under-communicating might be misread, and you can't afford to be misread. The short replies are not a personality trait either. They are a response to security. When you are sure where you stand, you don't feel the need to prove it. You don't explain because you don't feel like anything needs explaining. This pattern, one person reaching, the other person resting, shows up in almost every relationship where there is even a slight imbalance. And it changes the entire texture of how two people connect. The silence that speaks. One of the most powerful tools in any relationship is silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the comfortable silence of two people sitting together on a Sunday morning. The other kind. The kind that happens when someone chooses not to respond right away, or chooses not to bring something up, or lets a conversation end without resolving anything. In a balanced relationship, silence is just silence. A pause, a breath. No one reads into it. No one panics. In an unbalanced relationship, silence becomes a message. If the person with more power goes quiet after a difficult conversation, The other person panics. They think, are they mad? Did I push too hard? Should I apologize? Should I give them space? Should I reach out? They start replaying the conversation word by word. They start adjusting their behavior in advance of the next interaction, being lighter, easier, funnier, warmer, to close the gap they feel opening. If the person with less power goes quiet, the other person barely notices. Or they notice and think, they're being moody. They don't chase. They don't adjust. They don't replay the conversation. They wait because they know the other person will come back. The other person always comes back. This asymmetry, where one person's silence is alarming and the other person's silence is barely felt, is one of the clearest signs of a power imbalance. And most people never name it. They just feel it. They feel it when they are the one checking their phone. They feel it when they are the one who always breaks the silence first. They feel it when they're the one who says, "Are we okay?" While the other person says, "Yeah, why wouldn't we be?" The person asking, "Are we okay?" is the one with less power. Not because they are weak, not because they are insecure by nature, but because they are the one who cannot afford for things to not be okay. The stakes are different for them, and stakes change behavior. There is another version of this silence that is worth noticing. It happens when someone learns to stop bringing things up. Early in a relationship, both people speak freely. They raise concerns. They share feelings. They say what they think. But over time, if one person's concerns are met with withdrawal or dismissal, not cruelty, just a lack of engagement, they stop bringing things up. They learn that raising an issue costs more than staying quiet. And so they go silent. Not because the feelings are gone, but because expressing them has become too expensive. That kind of silence doesn't look like silence. It looks like peace. It looks like a couple who doesn't fight. But underneath the calm surface is a person who has simply stopped trying. And that is not peace. That is resignation. How people can misread what is happening. This is where most people get it wrong. They look at the person who reaches out more and think that person is clingy. They look at the person who responds less and think that person is independent. They look at the one who softens their language and think that person is passive. They look at the one who speaks directly and think that person is confident. But none of those labels are about personality. They are about position. Put the confident person in a situation where they depend on someone else for emotional stability, and watch how quickly they start choosing their words carefully. Put the clingy person in a relationship where they feel secure and genuinely desired, and watch how easily they relax. Watch how quickly too much becomes just right when the conditions change. These are not fixed traits. They are responses to conditions. A woman who texts her partner 3 times before getting a reply isn't needy. She's responding to a gap. She is reaching for something that keeps moving away from her. And the reaching looks desperate only because the moving away looks normal. A man who takes hours to reply isn't avoidant. He's responding to comfort. He isn't reaching because he doesn't feel a gap. Everything feels fine to him. Because it is fine from where he stands. A person who cries during arguments isn't too emotional. They're responding to the feeling that they can't afford to lose this. The tears are not manipulation. They are overflow. When someone is arguing for the survival of the thing they need most, their body responds accordingly. The labels we give people in relationships almost always describe their position, not their character, but we treat them as permanent truths. We say, she's always been anxious. We say, he's just not a communicator. We say, that's just how they are. And we close the case. We stop looking at the structure and focus on the person. We pathologize the reaction instead of examining what produced it. But if you change the conditions, you change the behavior. Every time. Think about a person who was once the calm, steady one in a relationship. Cool under pressure, never jealous, never clingy. The one who replied in their own time. The one who never seemed rattled. That relationship ends. They enter a new one. But in this new one, they are more invested. They are the one who wants it more. They are the one who feels the pull. And suddenly, they are the one checking their phone. They are the one sending the long texts. They are the one lying awake at 2 in the morning wondering if things are okay. They haven't changed as a person. Their position changed. The ground beneath them shifted and their behavior shifted with it. This is the thing most people never understand about love. The behavior you see in someone is not just who they are. It is who they are in this particular arrangement. Change the arrangement, and you change the behavior. The anxious partner in one relationship can become the distant partner in the next. The accommodating one can become the one who withholds. The one who chases can become the one who is chased. It was never about character. It was always about position. How the pattern grows. Power imbalances in relationships don't stay the same size. They grow, not because anyone wants them to, but because the pattern feeds itself. Here is how. The person with less power adjusts their behavior. They become easier, more agreeable, quicker to apologize, slower to bring up problems. They stop making requests that might cause friction. They become the person who says, whatever you want is fine, even when it isn't fine. They do this to keep the peace, to keep the connection, to avoid being too much. But here's what happens when someone becomes easier. The other person starts to expect it. They don't expect it on purpose. It just becomes the baseline. If your partner never pushes back, you stop preparing for pushback. If your partner always apologizes first, you stop feeling the need to apologize. If your partner always reaches out, you stop reaching out because you know they will. If your partner always says, whatever you want is fine, you start believing them, and you stop asking. And so the gap widens. Not because someone decided to widen it, but because one person's adjustment became the other person's expectation. The person who was leaning forward is now leaning further. The person who was leaning back is now resting. And both people think this is just the shape of their relationship. This is just how we are. Neither sees the pattern. They just feel it as normal. But there is a cost. The person doing all the adjusting starts to feel invisible. They start to feel like they are performing a version of themselves that was designed to keep someone else comfortable. They lose track of what they actually want because wanting things has become risky. Every time they expressed a preference, it landed heavier than they intended. Every time they had a need, it felt like a burden. So they stopped expressing needs. And now they feel hollow. Present, but hollow. The person who is being adjusted to starts to feel something different. They feel a vague boredom, a flatness, a lack of challenge. They may feel loved, but they don't feel engaged. They start to take the relationship for granted. Not because they don't care, but because there is no friction, no tension, no surprise. Everything is smooth because one person is doing all the smoothing. And smooth, after a while, just feels like nothing. And then one day, the person who has been adjusting stops. Maybe they meet someone who treats them differently. Maybe they read something that names what they've been living. Maybe they have a conversation with a friend who asks, "Why are you always the one bending?" Maybe they just get tired, but they stop softening. They stop reaching out first. They stop apologizing for things they didn't do. They stop making everything easy. And the other person suddenly wakes up. They feel the shift like a change in temperature. The easy warmth they were used to is gone. The reliable presence is quieter. The person who was always there, always adjusting, always accommodating, always making things smooth, is suddenly just standing still. Not pulling away, not punishing, just standing still. And standing still from someone who always moved toward you feels like a withdrawal. This is the moment when power shifts. Not because someone played a game, not because someone followed a strategy, but because one person stopped carrying the weight of the connection, and the other person finally felt what it weighs. The role of alternatives. There is a concept that explains a lot about love, and most people have never heard it put this way. In any relationship, both people have what you could call alternatives. Not necessarily other romantic partners, though that is part of it. Alternatives means, what does my life look like if this relationship ends tomorrow? If one person has a full life, friends they see regularly, hobbies that give them energy, work they care about, financial stability, family support nearby, then the end of the relationship is painful but survivable. They lose the relationship, but they keep their foundation. The ground they stand on doesn't disappear. If the other person has built their life around the relationship, if their partner is their best friend, their financial partner, their emotional anchor, their social planner, and their daily source of comfort, then the end of the relationship means losing everything. Not just the partner, the entire structure of their life. That difference in alternatives is where most of the power in relationships actually comes from. It isn't about love. It isn't about commitment. It is about what each person stands to lose, and how much of their world is held up by this one connection. The person with more alternatives can walk away. They may not want to. They may love the relationship deeply, but they can leave. And because they can, they move with a certain freedom. They don't cling. They don't over-explain. They don't bend themselves into unrecognizable shapes to keep things working. The person with fewer alternatives cannot walk away as easily. The cost of leaving is too high. Not just emotionally, practically. Where would they go? Who would they talk to? What would their week look like? So they stay, and they adjust, and they accommodate. Not because they want to, but because leaving feels impossible. The exit is too expensive. This doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. One person has 3 close friends they can call when things are hard. The other person has one, and it's their partner. One person has a hobby that gives them identity and joy outside the relationship. The other person gave theirs up years ago. One person has money in the bank. The other person has shared expenses they couldn't cover alone. These differences are not about weakness. They are about structure, and they shape everything. How much someone tolerates, how quickly they forgive, how often they speak up, and how much of themselves they are willing to lose in order to keep the relationship going. What happens when both people know? Sometimes both people in a relationship are aware of the imbalance. They don't talk about it directly. They don't sit down and say, I have more power than you. But they both feel it. They both know. The person with more power knows. They can tell their partner is more invested. They see the effort. They see the accommodation. They see the careful wording and the quick apologies and the way their partner lights up when they walk into the room. And it creates a strange mix of comfort and guilt. Comfort because they feel secure, deeply, almost lazily secure. Guilt because they know, somewhere beneath the comfort, that the other person is working harder to hold this together. Some people respond to that guilt by pulling away. They create distance to manage the discomfort of being loved more than they love back. They become cold not because they don't care, but because the weight of someone else's need feels like a debt they can't repay. So they withdraw, hoping the other person will need them less. But the withdrawal only makes the other person need them more. Others respond by staying but withholding. They stay in the relationship but hold back emotional investment. They keep one foot out. They enjoy the warmth without sitting all the way down in it. And the other person senses this, senses the 1 foot out, senses the reservation, and works even harder to pull them in, which only confirms the imbalance. The person with less power also knows. They know they are the one reaching more. They know their partner isn't as worried about losing them. They know the dynamic isn't even. But they don't say it out loud, because naming it would make it real. And if it's real, they might have to do something about it. They might have to confront the possibility that they are giving more than they are receiving. And that confrontation feels more dangerous than the imbalance itself. So both people know, and both people pretend they don't. And the relationship continues, held together not by shared investment, but by shared avoidance of the truth. This is one of the saddest patterns in love. Not cruelty, not deception, not betrayal. Just two people who both understand the shape of what they've built, and neither one willing to say it out loud. Why love and fairness don't mean the same thing. People want love to be fair. They want both people to invest equally, care equally, sacrifice equally, and need each other in exactly the same way, at exactly the same time. But that almost never happens. Not perfectly, not consistently, not for long. At any given moment in a relationship, one person is a little more invested than the other. One person is a little more afraid of losing it. One person is a little more dependent on it for their sense of self, their daily structure, or their emotional stability. This doesn't mean the relationship is broken. It means the relationship is real. The problem is not that imbalances exist. The problem is when they go unacknowledged. When both people pretend the ground is level, the person standing lower quietly sinks. They adjust without being asked. They accommodate without being thanked. They give up preferences, opinions, routines, friendships, and pieces of their own identity without anyone noticing, including eventually themselves. Fair relationships are not relationships where no imbalance exists. Fair relationships are relationships where both people can see the imbalance and talk about it. Where the person with more power chooses to be careful with it. Where the person with less power is allowed to name what they need without being punished for it. Without withdrawal, silence, or the other person making them feel like they are being unreasonable for having needs at all. That kind of honesty is rare, but it is what makes the difference between a relationship where both people grow and a relationship where one person slowly disappears. How to see it in your own life. If you want to understand where the power sits in your own relationship, there are a few things you can look at. Not to keep score, not to build a case, but to see clearly. Who sends the first text most days? Not every day, but most days. The person who reaches out first is usually the one with more at stake in the connection. They are the one who wakes up thinking about the other person. They are the one whose day feels incomplete without contact. Who brings up problems? The person who raises issues is the one who cares enough to risk the discomfort. The person who avoids problems is the one who can afford to let things slide, because things sliding doesn't scare them the way it scares the other person. Who adjusts their schedule? If one person is always the one rearranging plans, canceling things, driving farther, staying up later, getting up earlier, making room, that person is doing more structural work to keep the relationship functioning. That work is invisible, but it is a sign of who holds less power. The person who adjusts is the person who has decided, often without realizing it, that the other person's time is more valuable than their own. Who apologizes first? Not because they were wrong, but because they couldn't stand the tension. The person who breaks first in a conflict is the person who needs resolution more. And needing resolution more means needing the relationship more. Who controls the pace of physical closeness? The person who decides when warmth happens, when hugs happen, when affection happens, when distance happens, holds a kind of power that is rarely discussed. If one person is always the one reaching, and the other is always the one deciding whether to receive it, there is an imbalance. Not a crisis, but a pattern. None of these things by themselves mean something is wrong. But if the same person is always on the same side of every one of these questions, a pattern is present. And that pattern is worth seeing clearly. What it looks like when it shifts. Power in relationships is not permanent. It moves, sometimes slowly over months or years, sometimes overnight. A person gets a new job. Their confidence shifts. They stand a little taller. They stop asking permission for how they spend their time. They have people at work who respect them, seek them out, laugh at their ideas. Their partner notices that they seem different, a little less available, a little less accommodating. The dynamic changes. A person makes a new close friend. Suddenly they have somewhere else to go with their feelings. They don't dump everything on their partner anymore. They don't need their partner to be their therapist, their cheerleader, and their only source of connection. Their partner notices they're not being reached for as often. And that noticing, that faint surprise at not being needed as much, is the sound of the dynamic shifting. A person gets sick, or loses a parent, or goes through something that makes them need their partner in a way they didn't before. The partner who was leaning back is now needed, genuinely needed. And needing someone is different from wanting someone. The dynamic changes because the stakes change. One of the most common shifts happens when someone who was over-functioning in the relationship simply stops. They stop planning the dates. They stop checking in 3 times a day. They stop managing the emotional temperature of the household. They stop being the one who says, "How was your day?" They don't do this as a strategy. They don't do it to prove a point. They do it because they are exhausted, because they woke up one morning and realized they had been carrying something that was supposed to be shared. And the other person, who had grown used to all of that being done for them, suddenly has to feel the absence. They have to experience what the relationship is like when both people are putting in the same amount of effort. And sometimes, for the first time, they realize how much effort the other person had been putting in all along. Sometimes this saves the relationship. The other person wakes up, steps forward, and starts carrying their share. The balance shifts towards something more honest. Sometimes it ends the relationship. The other person realizes they were comfortable, not committed. They were enjoying the ease, not building something real. When the comfort disappears, so do they. Either way, the shift reveals the truth. And the truth is, the relationship was never as mutual as it appeared. One person was carrying it, and when they set it down, both people could finally see what it weighed. What this is really about. Love is one of the few things people refuse to look at clearly. They will analyze their work performance. They will track their spending. They will evaluate their friendships. They will review their diets and their sleep and their screen time. But when it comes to the person they love, they go blind. They call it trust. They call it commitment. They call it not overthinking. But really, it's avoidance. They don't want to see the shape of the thing they're standing inside, because seeing it would mean dealing with it. And the reason they don't want to see it is simple. If you see the imbalance, you have to decide what to do about it. You have to ask yourself, am I okay being the one who loves more? Am I okay being the one who always reaches first? Am I okay being the one who adjusts, accommodates, softens, and makes space, while the other person simply shows up? Some people are okay with that. They love hard and they know it. They give more and they've made peace with it. That is their choice, and it can be a good one, as long as they made the choice with open eyes. But other people didn't choose it. They slid into it. They accommodated their way into a position they never meant to occupy. And now they are so deep in the pattern that they have forgotten what it feels like to be met halfway. They have forgotten what it feels like to be reached for, to be pursued, to be the one someone else is afraid of losing. The power dynamics of love are not something to fix, they are something to see. Because once you see them, really see them without flinching, you get to make a choice you couldn't make before. You get to ask, is this the shape I want my love to take? Not every relationship will be perfectly balanced. That is not the point. The point is that you should know where you stand. You should be able to look at the dynamic clearly, name it honestly, and decide, with your eyes open, whether this is something you want to keep building. Because the worst thing that power does in love is not that it hurts people, it's that it hides. It hides inside kindness, inside patience, inside keeping the peace, inside the belief that love means never making things uncomfortable. But love that never makes anything uncomfortable is love where one person is doing all the work of comfort. And that is not peace. That is silence. And silence in an unbalanced relationship is not the absence of conflict. It is the sound of someone disappearing. Pay attention to who reaches first. Pay attention to who adjusts. Pay attention to who waits and who chases. Pay attention to whose silence causes panic and whose silence goes unnoticed. These are not small things. These are the architecture of your relationship. And most people walk through that architecture every single day without ever looking up to see what's holding the roof in place. Now you know what to look for. The next time you send a message, and then wait, really wait, for a reply, notice what happens inside you. Notice whether you feel calm or anxious. Notice whether you feel like an equal or like someone hoping to be chosen. That feeling is not random. It is not a flaw. It is information. It is telling you exactly where you stand in the structure of your own love. And now that you can see it, you get to decide what to do about it.